Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in some really crucial reports and official statements from just this week, mid-October 2025. They paint a picture of, well, something quite extraordinary, how this escalating U.S.-China trade conflict has really weaponized agriculture. We're calling it the U.S.-China soybean war. It's become this high-stakes economic battlefield, and honestly, the political fallout is looking pretty destabilizing.
That's exactly right. And for you listening, our mission today is really to get past those headlines. We want to unpack the mechanics of this crisis. How did these tit-for-tat tariffs lead China to just completely zero out U.S. soybean imports? Why is this pushing American farmers towards a crisis? And maybe most importantly, how is Beijing using this agricultural leverage? It's not just short-term payback, is it? It looks like a long-term play for their own food security.
Yeah, and the tone coming out of Beijing is just striking, so defiant. We've got these direct statements that really define the mood. Hu Xijin, former editor of the Global Times, usually reflect establishment thinking. He said on October 10th, basically, China is ready for confrontation. They won't submit. And he specifically said China will certainly not, quote, take it lying down like the Europeans. That kind of rhetoric, it frames this whole thing as national honor, doesn't it? Like the economic cost is almost secondary.
Absolutely. That idea that the price is worth paying to avoid appearing weak, that's fundamental. It seems to explain pretty much every move China's made since. It's a clear refusal to bow to economic pressure.
Okay, so let's walk through how it escalated. The sources lay out some specific U.S. actions earlier this year that really cranked up the tension. What were those key triggers?
Well, the administration rolled out several punitive measures, pretty significant ones. We saw the Commerce Department blacklist 15 Chinese companies. And then there were sanctions on Chinese oil refineries, specifically those importing Iranian oil. These weren't small moves. They signaled a pretty hard line, and you could argue they almost forced China to react strongly.
Which brings us to that really intense tariff fight back in April 2025. And it started, interestingly, with the president claiming he was just imposing reciprocal tariffs, right? Based on this idea that China was already hitting the U.S. with a 67% tariff, which the sources we have confirmed was just not accurate.
Right. The number itself was off, but the U.S. action that followed was very real. A hefty 34% tariff on a whole range of Chinese imports. But what was really unprecedented, as the reports call it, was how fast and how symmetrically China responded. Within days, April 4th, Beijing announced they'd slap an identical 34% tariff on U.S. imports starting April 10th. It was like, bam, dollar for dollar.
Okay, so an equal tariff, that's kind of classic trade war stuff.
Yeah.
But China's move went deeper almost immediately, didn't it? They didn't just rely on tariffs. They hit specific U.S. weak spots.
They did. Two key ones mentioned. They restricted exports of rare earth metals, essential for high-tech manufacturing globally. And then, the one we're focusing on, they announced a complete stop to buying U.S. soybeans starting that May. It felt like a calculated move to show they had weapons that could inflict deep, targeted pain. To remind Washington that China is, quote, not a helpless country.
So let's pause on that. What's the strategic difference there? Hitting imports with a tariff versus just cutting off purchases of something essential like soybeans? Which one bites faster?
Oh, the soybean cutoff is way more devastating, much faster, because it targets this very specific, established, highly concentrated industry. A tariff, well, it's a tax. Companies can try to absorb it, pass it on, maybe find workarounds. But halting soybean purchases, that just vaporizes the market overnight for a product that U.S. farmers were, as we'll get into, totally reliant on selling to China. The price collapses, the whole business plan is ruined, and you've got this massive physical product, well, stuck.
And that leads us right into the devastation, the on-the-ground impact. Soybeans became casualty number one. The figures are just stark. In 2024, China bought $12.6 billion worth of U.S. soybeans. Today, zero. It's gone.
Yeah, that complete evaporation, it's catastrophic because of this deep structural dependency built up over, 40 years? You've got to remember the history here. 52%, more than half of all U.S. soybean exports were going straight to China. The whole American soybean industry, basically, was scaled up over decades, specifically to meet that huge, consistent Chinese demand for animal feed.
And farmers acted on that assumption this year, too. They planted over 83 million acres. Their entire business model banked on China buying.
And there's just no other buyer that can absorb that kind of volume. I mean, China is the world's biggest soybean importer by far. They consume something like 61% of all soybeans traded globally. So when Beijing says, we're not buying, they're effectively taking the single largest customer off the map. It leaves U.S. farmers with this massive surplus nobody else can really take.
And this is where you see the immediate human costs. We're right in the thick of harvest season now, October, November.
Mm.
And the crop is coming in, but there's nowhere for it to go. The supply chain is just seizing up. We have this quote from Ron Kindred, a farmer in Illinois. He put it bluntly. He said, "We will collapse economically if we don't reach an agreement with China soon." When he said that, he was halfway through harvesting 1,700 acres, and 60% of his crop was unsold, sitting there.
That quote really hits home. It shows the immediate cash flow crisis. You've got this crop, its value has plummeted, but you still have to store it, or you did pay for seed, fuel, equipment. Those input costs were high. So that physical surplus, it represents this giant financial hole they suddenly have no way to fill.
Right, so if the pain is that immediate and that severe for the U.S. side, why is China seemingly okay maintaining this boycott? This takes us into Section 4 in our outline, China's longer-term strategy. It seems to go way beyond just simple tariff retaliation.
Yeah, it's really crucial to see this as having two layers. Sure, the boycott is a powerful negotiating tactic, a sword hanging over the Americans' necks, as one report puts it. But underneath that, it seems fundamentally driven by these deep, long-term worries about their own national food security.
Tell us more about that unreliable supplier idea you mentioned.
Well, supply chain analysts like Cameron Johnson point this out. They say Beijing now basically views the U.S. as inherently unreliable. After seeing the U.S. use sanctions against companies like Huawei, they worry that Washington, perhaps under a leader like Trump described as volatile, could cut off anything. Tech chips, fine. Natural gas, maybe. But critically, soybeans. They see it as a potential political weapon the U.S. could wield anytime. And for a country obsessed with stability, relying on a volatile source for something so critical, that's become an unacceptable risk.
And soybeans specifically.
Yeah.
The stakes are almost existential for China's internal stability, right?
Oh, absolutely. They are the bedrock of Chinese food security. Soybeans are the main ingredient in animal feed. That feed supports their massive livestock industry, especially pigs. Over 400 million pigs, that's the primary source of meat protein for, 1.4 billion people. So leaving that crucial supply chain vulnerable to American political decisions, that's risking food prices, social stability, everything.
And while U.S. farmers are facing potential collapse, China seems relatively stable.
All right.
Because they moved fast, didn't they? They didn't just stop buying U.S. beans, they lined up alternatives.
Exactly. They aggressively shifted their buying. They're leaning heavily on Brazil and Argentina now. Both South American countries have ramped up shipments, and there's talk of long-term infrastructure deals to make that shift more permanent. Plus, China has built up a huge strategic reserve of soybeans. It's approaching 44 million metric tons.
Wow. Why is having that massive reserve so important tactically?
Well, 44 million tons. That's an enormous buffer, financially, politically. It means China can keep up this boycott for a long time, months, maybe even over a year, without facing crippling domestic price hikes or shortages. That insulation gives them breathing room. They don't feel the same urgent political or economic heat to cut a deal that U.S. farmers are feeling. They can afford to wait, which just reinforces that we won't submit posture.
And if you map that stability in China against the political landscape in the U.S., the sources are pretty clear. The Chinese strategy is deliberately targeted. Which parts of the U.S. are feeling this most?
Yeah, the pain is definitely concentrated geographically. It's hitting the U.S. Midwest hard. States like Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Indiana. And politically, that's significant. These are traditionally Republican strongholds, states that are absolutely crucial for the upcoming 2026 congressional elections. The strategy seems designed to make the economic pain translate directly into political pressure on the administration.
Right. We saw that quote from Harry Broadman, the former U.S. trade official. He basically confirmed that political goal, said the Chinese strategy is engineered so farmers point the finger at the president and say, he's the reason for this mess.
It's a difficult position for the administration. They're getting intense pushback now, not just from Democrats, but from powerful farm lobbies groups that are usually allies demanding immediate action.
So the administration's response has been to promise aid, right? Like the $23 billion they gave out during the first term's trade issues. But the scale of this problem seems much bigger now.
Much bigger. Yeah, experts are estimating the actual need to compensate farmers this time could be closer to $50 billion. And getting that money faces this huge, complicated roadblock right
The
now.
roadblock being the political gridlock in Congress and the government shutdown that started in early October.
Exactly. A $50 billion aid package like that needs approval from Congress. It needs appropriation. But with the fierce partisan fighting and the government literally shut down for non-essential functions, Getting that emergency funding through is slow, difficult, and honestly not guaranteed at all. So the U.S. government is struggling to fix a crisis partly of its own making, while its own political system is kind of seizing up.
And even if that $50 billion eventually shows up, it only covers the immediate financial loss, right? The deeper threat is structural, possibly permanent.
That's the long-term economic nightmare, yes. You had U.S. farmers over decades shifting millions of acres away from crops like wheat or corn into soybeans. Planted acreage went up something like 40% between 1995 and 2024, all geared towards that Chinese market. And billions were invested in specialized infrastructure, rail lines, port facilities, storage silos, all designed just to move those beans efficiently across the Pacific.
So if China permanently shifts its buying, if those new routes from Brazil and Argentina become the norm, all that specialized U.S. infrastructure becomes obsolete, stranded.
Pretty much. That entire system, built over 30 years, potentially collapses. And the damage isn't just soybeans. We saw overall U.S. agricultural exports to China dropped 53% just in the first 7 months of this year. This isn't something the administration can just fix with one good negotiation. The actual structure of the global market is changing under their feet.
Which leaves us at this impasse. The administration's strategy, seemingly based on more pressure will eventually work, has clearly backfired against China. China just isn't acting like, well, like a helpless country. They seem willing to absorb the economic pain to avoid looking weak.
And that stalemate just crushed the hopes of American farmers. They were desperately pinning their hopes on the upcoming APEC summit. You know, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting scheduled for October 30th. That's usually a key place for trade talks.
But those hopes are gone now. In the past couple of weeks, the president doubled down, threatened 100% additional tariffs, and crucially, canceled his planned meeting with the Chinese president at APEC. So the door for diplomacy isn't just closed. It feels like it's being actively barricaded.
Yeah, it's a pattern now where the economic pain isn't leading to compromise, it's leading to more confrontation. It shows neither side wants to be the first to blink.
So here's the final thought, really prompted by the sources we've looked at today. When aggressive economic policies don't achieve their goals, when tariffs escalate into fights over strategic resources like food, the risk of broader conflict grows. Given this level of escalation, the canceled meetings, the 100% tariff threats, the diplomatic breakdown, you have to ask the question the sources seem to raise. Could this confrontational approach, driven by the soybean war, actually lead the U.S. towards a military confrontation with China before the president's term is up? It forces you to think, is this fight over a bean now tied to the stability of the entire Pacific?